Hello, hello. We've got The Bridge to Belle Island, chapter 20, coming right up. 21, actually. Chapter 21. Um, Enos Redknapp is apparently a really shady character, as we're finding out from Captain Curtis, who got a little bit involved with him and got Percival Norris involved as well. So, the plot thickens. Chapter 21, here we go. Isabel and Teddy sat side by side in the small family chapel. He laid a comforting hand on her arm. He was old. He simply died in his sleep. We've known this was coming. Isabel wiped her eyes. I know. Still, it is hard to lose him, especially if I somehow poisoned him. You did not. It was just his time. That old dog lived longer than anyone expected. She sniffed and nodded. Even so, I am doubly glad I dumped out the rest of the orange wine. Dr. Grant hesitated. I am not sure that was wise. It makes you appear very guilty. I am not guilty. I know. I never doubted it for an instant. But destroying evidence like that was, risky. And what would you have advised me to do instead? He nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps nail the bottles shut in a crate and mark it with a skull and crossbones? Oh, that would not make me look suspicious at all. He acknowledged her point with an apologetic grin. Sorry. Then perhaps I could have tested it on my mice? No, Teddy. You know I don't approve of your experiments. Only thinking out loud. She huffed, shaking her head. He took her hand in his. You have Ollie now. Don't forget. I don't forget. I will come to care for him just as much in time, no doubt. But my heart is still full of Hamish. He is not so easily replaced. She pulled her hand from his and stood. Remembering something, she looked back at him. Why did you not tell me your father has returned? He pulled a face. Because I knew it would upset you. He is only visiting. It won't be for long. Before she could say more, Rose came in and embraced her. I am sorry, Aunt Belle. I know how much you loved Hamish. Tears sprang to her eyes anew at the sympathy of one so dear to her. Thank you, my love. Shall we have a burial service for him? Rose suggested. Say a few words? Share some memories? How thoughtful. Yes, I would like that very much. Bidding Teddy farewell, they went off to make preparations. Benjamin slipped down the passage to the Wilders family chapel, taking the rolled paper with him. He felt drawn there to pray. Light from lancet-shaped, stained glass windows shone on the modest altar and communion table, lending them a golden cast. Plaques carved with the Ten Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, and the Apostles' Creed hung on the walls. Instead of pews, padded oak chairs faced the altar and a simple stand for reading the lessons. Setting aside the paper, Benjamin reverently approached the altar rail and sank onto the kneeling pad to pray, elbows on the railing, hands clasped, eyes closed. He thanked God that Mr. Hardy had not been injured, or more seriously, or killed, and prayed for his complete recovery. He prayed for the safety of everyone on the island. He also asked God to comfort Miss Wilder in her grief over the loss of a beloved family pet. Had the old dog really died of natural causes? Ben believed so, hoped so. While he was there, he also prayed for wisdom. He'd found no trace of a newer will and had no idea where to look. Was it time to admit defeat? The door creaked open, and Benjamin looked over his shoulder. Miss Wilder entered the quiet room, book in hand, and hesitated upon seeing him there. Sorry to disturb you. I didn't know anyone was in here. I can leave and let you. He rose and turned to her. No, please join me. She walked forward. So, you have discovered our little chapel? Yes. I hope you don't mind. Of course not. It is used too rarely. though Mr. Truelock comes here once a month to read prayers and administer communion on holy days. She lifted the volume in her hand. I only came to return a prayer book. Rose read from it for a little graveside service we had for Hamish. I suppose you think that terribly silly. Not at all. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. I certainly hope I didn't somehow poison him. Me too, thought Ben. Ben gestured toward the chairs. She sat, and he took the chair beside her. How is Mr. Hardy? She asked. Better. His pain has lessened. Good. Were you praying for him? Yes, and for help and wisdom. Help in finding the truth? She asked. Yes. She looked at him earnestly. Do you really believe the truth sets us free? I do. Oh, what it must be like to be free. She closed her eyes. To trust God and not be trapped by fear and worry. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. I understand, and I'll pray for you. Thank you. Miss Wilder shifted uneasily, and he let his hand drop. She asked, How are things going with the search for the will? Benjamin shook his head. I wish I had better news for you, especially after the loss of Hamish. But I have been through all the papers in the study and have not found a will or trust amendment that supersedes the one naming Percival Norris trustee and Robert Hardy his successor. Isabel slowly nodded. I knew it was unlikely. Still, I did hope. Anywhere else I can look? He asked. Your parents' bedchamber? A writing desk? I have searched there already. Papa did have an old writing slant he used when traveling, but when I looked, it was empty. You told me all their belongings were returned after the accident. Their baggage and personal effects? Yes, everything, I believe. Even the ruined traveling chariot, though I could not bring myself to look closely. He stole a sheepish glance at her and admitted, I looked at it. I hope you don't mind. Abel mentioned that. Did you find anything? I'm afraid not. She sighed. Too bad, though not surprising after all this time. Benjamin picked up the roll of paper from the chair beside him, hesitated, then cleared his throat. I thought you might want to see this. I hope it's not too morbid or upsetting. She accepted it from him, eyebrows high. What is it? He made no answer. As she slowly unrolled the paper, he held one edge to help her spread out the charcoal rubbing. She drew in a sharp breath, staring down at the headstone rendering in shock, wonder, grief? Ben was not sure. He began to think he had erred and that his idea had been an unfeeling one. I'm sorry. I hoped it would be a comfort, but if I was wrong, pray excuse me. Miss Wilder looked up at him, tears in her wide blue eyes. On the contrary, Mr. Booker, I can't tell you what it means to see it again. I barely remember the inscription I chose so long ago in a muddle of grief, let alone what it looks like. She nodded to the emblem of the weeping willow. The stone carver suggested it. A common symbol of grief, I know, but how much more meaningful it seems to me now. She reached out and pressed his hand, the released corner curling. Thank you, Mr. Booker. It was a truly thoughtful gesture. Mingled pleasure and self-consciousness rippled through him. Miss Truelock kindly provided the materials. She did not mention it, but I shall thank her next I see her. She did tell me you laid flowers on my parents' grave. I appreciate that as well. He felt his neck warm, his chest expand. It was an honor. I know you would do so if you could. Indeed, I would, she murmured, her eyes soft and glowing as she gazed into his. The warm way she looked at him did strange and wonderful things to his heart. The following afternoon, Constable Ray returned to let them know that old Mr. Colebrook, a net-maker, had seen a man standing on a barge with what looked like a gun aimed at the island. He saw a flash and heard the report. Ray told him he would alert the proper authorities and keep an eye out for the vessel, but said there was little he could do otherwise. Isabel had never truly believed anyone on the island might be responsible, but Mr. Booker had seemed relieved at this confirmation that the shot had not been fired by an island resident. They were still in danger, but somehow danger from within would seem worse. To everyone's further relief, Dr. Grant came back to see how Mr. Hardy was getting on, and reported that the patient was doing well, and the wound showed no sign of infection. After that, the rest of the afternoon passed peacefully, with Abel and Captain Curtis making occasional rounds of the island like sentries. Mr. Booker suggested they begin bolting the doors, and urged everyone to remain indoors as much as possible. Isabel, however, insisted on delivering meals to the weavers as usual. "Mr. Hardy is asking for me, or I would come with you," Mr. Booker said. "At least take Jacob with you." "Very well," Isabel agreed, and waved him on his way, telling him she would be fine. She had always been safe on Belle Island, and hoped that would never change. Jacob and Ollie did accompany her to the weaving shed, but then Mr. Linton, the foreman, asked for the young man's help with something, so Isabel walked back with only Ollie's protection, such as it was. As usual, the pup ran off in futile chase of a squirrel. Watchdog, indeed. Isabel walked inland, looking for Ollie and calling his name. How far did her voice carry? She wondered, hoping no one watched and noticed she was alone. Looking nervously out at the river, she saw only a passing fishing boat. All is well, she told herself. Reaching the stream, Isabel again stood on the small stone bridge, surveying the familiar scene, lagoon, statue, and boathouse beyond. No sign of her runaway pup. Belatedly aware of something out of place, her eyes swung back to the statue of her great-grandmother feeding swans. She sucked in a breath, stomach clenching. Hoping it was only a trick of the light, she quickly followed the stream, eyes riveted, breathing fast. Drawing near, she blinked and looked again. No trick. The statue was missing its head. A shiver ran over her, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. The sight that had compelled her forward now repelled her. She backed away, her panicked mind faltering for explanation. An accident? A recent lightning storm? No, it would not do. Someone had done this intentionally. She stumbled over a tree root, righted herself, and ran back to the manor house. Ollie appeared from the direction of the stables, bounding after her as though in a game of chase. Reaching the garden door, she let them both inside and slammed it behind her. "Ma'am?" Isabel whirled, a gasp escaping her. "Oh, sorry, you startled me." One of the housemaids stood there, eyes wide. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I will be. Excuse me." Still breathing hard, Isabel climbed the stairs to her room, wishing she had heeded Mr. Booker's suggestion to bolt all the doors. Someone might have let themselves in as easily as she had just done. Enos Redknapp might even now be waiting for her in some shadowy corner with whatever tool of destruction he'd used to knock the head from the statue still gripped in his beefy hand, ready to use it on her. Another shiver passed over her. Foolish creature. No one has sneaked into your house. It would be too risky. Jacob or any one of the servants might have caught him. No, she was letting her imagination do its frightening worst. Reaching her private sanctuary, Isabel closed the bedchamber door and leaned against the heavy oak as if it were a gladiator's shield. She was safe. Then she saw it and gasped, instantly beginning to tremble. There on her dressing table was the stone head. The vacant eyes silently mocked her. Isabel let out a little cry and yanked open the door. "Mr. Booker!" she called instinctively, then repeated his name more urgently. He emerged from Mr. Hardy's room at the end of the passage, concern furrowing his brow. "What is it? What's wrong?" She waved him into her room and pointed at the offending object. "It was here when I came in. Someone put it there for me to find." Leaving the door ajar, he crossed the room, regarding the stone more closely. Is that from the statue in the lagoon?" Incredulity and anger darkened his tone. "Yes, It's a threat. I am sure of it. He came back to her, eyes sparkling with intensity. Bracketing her trembling shoulders with his strong hands, he looked into her eyes, and she could not look away. Did not want to. You are going to be all right. I will do whatever it takes to protect you. And so will Abel and the captain, I know. But if Redknapp was in my room... Suddenly, unsteady at the thought, she felt Mr. Booker's arms wrap around her, holding her close. She laid her cheek on his chest. Hearing the thump of his steady heart, Isabel felt warm and protected and valued. Carlotta stepped into the room. Niece, I... Seeing the two of them embracing, her dark brows rose. Oh, pardonnez-moi. Mr. Booker stepped back, and whatever Lottie saw in their faces chased the coy gleam from her eyes. You saw it? Lottie gestured across the room. Isabel nodded, the blood pounding in her head. Captain Curtis found it on the pier. I brought it up here to show you. I didn't want Abel to add it to the garden wall or toss it into the river, not realizing what it was. You brought it in here? Yes. Who do you think? Oh! Carlotta's eyes widened. Lo siento. I never meant to frighten you. Isabel released a pent-up breath. I thought your old friend Enos broke it off and left it here as a warning. Bah! Lottie spit out the syllable. Ese diablo is no friend of mine. She looked again at the head. But yes, you are right. I can easily believe it of him. What do we do now? Isabel asked. Ask a stonemason if it can be repaired. No, I mean about Redknapp. Eyes troubled, Lottie shrugged. They both looked to the tall lawyer. Mr. Booker slowly nodded. We pray he does not attempt to make good on his threat, but remain alert in case he does. That night, Benjamin sat on the veranda well past midnight. He realized it might not be wise to be outside alone, but he felt compelled to do something. Sitting there in the dark like a guard dog, he watched for passing boats and listened for any footfalls on the bridge, but noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Abel Curtis walked past, lantern in one hand, fowling piece in the other. The sight would have filled Ben with trepidation before the constable's report, but now it seemed reassuring. The old man nodded in his direction. Evening, Mr. Booker. Abel, you're up late? He nodded. Sat up with my Roy, and a friendly game of cards. Just thought I'd make a final round before I turn in. See anything? No. You? All's quiet. Guess I'll head home. Good night. When his footsteps faded, the quiet continued. With only the chirring of frogs for company, Ben's mind drifted. He thought about his parents, about Mr. and Mrs. Wilder, and the wrecked carriage. He thought about Enos Redknapp and Mr. Hardy, and wondered if his mentor might be in danger of another attack, or if they might all be in danger. A twig snapped, and Ben started. Across the lawn, a flash of movement caught his eye. A figure walked through a patch of moonlight before disappearing behind the house. Abel had gone home in the opposite direction some time ago. Benjamin rose to investigate, but hesitated at the edge of the veranda, wishing he had a lamp. As idyllic as the island seemed during the day, the atmosphere at night was altogether different. In the murky shadows, the swaying willows became misshapen monsters, arms bent low and dragging the ground. The water was inky black except where moonlight rippled its silver. Beneath the many trees, darkness reigned and promised danger. The strange cries of nocturnal birds sounded hauntingly over the island. A door closed nearby. He looked back and saw Miss Wilder stepping out on the veranda. "What are you doing?" She whispered. "I saw someone go behind the house." "Abel, maybe? Or Evan?" "I don't think so." "Well, it isn't as though we locked the bridge at night. Anyone could come over." "Including Redknapp." "True. Why? What do you suspect?" "Trouble. Go back inside." Excuse me. "No, I will go with you. I know this island far better than you do." And you don't like being told what to do. Also true. Very well, but stay close. Nothing selfish in that request, Benjamin chided himself. Miss Wilder stepped nearer. A bird screeched, and she jumped. Instinctively, she reached for his arm but found his hand. Or he found hers. He enveloped her fingers in his, pleased when she did not pull away. Sorry, she murmured. Only a barn owl. They walked like that, hand in hand, around the house and down the path, or at least where he believed the path to be, stumbling off course onto roots and rocks now and again. She said, We should have brought a lantern. Shh. What's that? Benjamin stopped to listen. Don't hush me, she whispered. There, a door sliding open. Or shut. The boathouse doors, Isabel confirmed. Stay here. No, Please, he added earnestly. Very well, she whispered back. But be careful. Isabel stood shivering as Mr. Booker disappeared into the darkness. Then she heard a thud and a grunt. Something or someone fell to the ground, while other footsteps retreated. Pulse pounding, Isabel ran toward the boathouse, almost tripping over Mr. Booker's fallen form. Mr. Booker, are you all right? She crouched next to him. In the distance, she heard muffled voices and the slap of oars paddling water. Footsteps came running. What is it? What's happened? Mr. Hardy appeared, lamp in hand, arm in a sling. Someone attacked Mr. Booker. Oh no. Benjamin, can you hear me? The older man knelt on the ground on his other side. She was surprised to see him up and about after his recent injury. Mr. Booker groaned, reached up, and rubbed his head. Who was it? Who hit me? You didn't see who it was? Too dark. Mr. Hardy looked at her. Miss Wilder? I couldn't see either, but I heard someone in the boathouse and the sound of paddling. Benjamin sat with a grimace, still rubbing his head. Goose egg rising already. Mr. Hardy rose and turned to the boathouse. I'll go in and take a look. I think whoever it was has already left by boat, Isabel told him. Just in case. Mr. Booker spoke up. Not alone, sir. You shouldn't even be out of bed. Here, wait for me. Isabel protested. Mr. Booker, perhaps you should lie still. I'll be all right. Always have been hard-headed. Together, she and Mr. Hardy helped Benjamin to his feet. Then Mr. Hardy handed Isabel the lantern and pulled a small pistol from his coat pocket. You came armed, sir? Benjamin asked, taken aback. Thought it a wise precaution, but was right to do so, apparently. One partner is dead already, I've been shot, and now another man from my firm is injured. Together they walked toward the bank and stepped onto the pier. On the river, a boat slipped away into the dark distance, the rhythmic paddling growing faint. The boathouse doors stood open. They were too late. Or were they? Hearing a muffled cough from inside, they all stilled to listen. Someone is still in there, Isabel hissed. Had the boat landed here and left a man behind? Or was the retreating boat a coincidence, unrelated to the attack? They slipped in through the side door. Mr. Booker tucked Isabel behind his back and helped himself to the lantern. He lifted it high, sending an arc of yellow light into the black confines of the boathouse. There the fishing boat in its watery bay, there the chaise lounges at the river doors, and finally a stack of large willow hampers being stored there. From behind the stack, a figure slowly arose, hands raised high. Peeking out from behind Benjamin's shoulder, Isabel gasped in alarm. Then the light illuminated the man's face. Silas Grant, Teddy's father. Confusion and disapproval coursing through her, she stepped out from behind Benjamin. Miss Isabel, he called. Oh, thank the Lord. I feared it were those men coming back again. Mr. Grant, what are you doing in here? Sleeping up in the loft. That is, till I heard men on the pier. Then I crept down and hid behind the hampers to see who it was. Why are you sleeping here? He looked down, shifting from foot to foot. I'm sorry, miss. I've been spending the evenings with my old friends Abel and Roy.
just playing cards and talking of old times. But sometimes we stay up till the wee hours, and I hate to disturb Teddy after he's abed, so I've taken to sleeping here when the nights grow late. I hope you don't mind."
Isabel did not like it, but politeness restrained her tongue. I I am just surprised. Did you recognize the men in the boat?
"No, couldn't make out their faces. I heard one call another Enos, but they were whispering, and my heart beating so loud I couldn't hear everything. Afraid they would hear it too. When they left, I heard someone say, 'Next time, we'll deliver more than a warning.'"
Isabel shuddered. Had striking Mr. Booker been another warning, as the beheaded statue had been? Beside her, Mr. Booker swayed to one side, and a low moan escaped him. Mr. Hardy shook his arm.
"Come, Benjamin, let's get you into the house." "Are you all right, young man?" Mr. Grant asked. "Shall I summon my son?"
No, thank you. Nothing he can do. He could give you something for the pain, Isabel said. I think I had better keep my wits about me. Isabel nodded her understanding. As they started toward the house, Mr. Grant followed. Walking beside her, he said,
"Miss Isabel, I wanted to say how sorry I am."
Bitterness soured her throat. I know, Mr. Grant, but now is not the time. We need to get Mr. Booker inside. In the lantern's light, she glimpsed the old man's crestfallen expression as he stopped in his tracks. She felt a glimmer of remorse, but returned her attention to Benjamin, saying, I shall see if there is any ice left in the ice house. That will help with the swelling, and I'll brew some willow bark tea. Thank you. Benjamin felt his mentor's inquisitive gaze slide from Miss Wilder to him and back again, and if he was not mistaken, he did not approve. With his good arm, Mr. Hardy helped him back into the house. When Isabel headed for the kitchen, Hardy whispered, Do you think it wise to drink anything she prepares when 2 people have been poisoned, and possibly a dog as well? She is not the one who tried to harm me tonight. If I am in danger, it is not from her. Are you certain? As certain as I can be. Was he? Yes. Benjamin really realized he believed her. He hoped he would not live to regret trusting her, nor die doing so either. What were you doing out there, sir? You should be resting. As I told you, I am worried about your safety, and mine, truth be told. I saw a lantern and a couple of shadowy figures moving about and came out to investigate. Did you see who it was? No, though I immediately suspected Redknapp. Ben nodded. Did you know he and Mr. Norris were working together? Mr. Hardy shook his head. Percy did tell me he was looking into ways to make the estate more profitable, but did not give me the particulars. Obviously, if I had known about this, I would have advised him against it in the strongest terms. Remember what Mr. Grant heard the men say? Next time we'll deliver more than a warning. I wish we knew when they plan to return. Hopefully they won't, but I shall keep my pistol handy just in case. Mr. Hardy saw Benjamin to his room, and then bade him good night, adding, I advise you keep a fire iron at your bedside for the same reason. A short while later, Miss Wilder came to his door, carrying a tray. May I come in? Of course. Has Mr. Hardy gone to bed? Yes. How are you feeling? I've been better. Any vertigo? Thankfully not, but my head is pounding like a drum. Here. She set down her tray. Willow bark tea and ice for your head. He sipped the tea and tried not to make a face. Sorry, rather bitter, I know. After he drunk most of it, she said, Now, lie down. Wait, kick off your shoes first. Here, let me help you with your coat. She tugged the snug sleeves from his arms and hung the coat over his chair. Lie back. He felt self-conscious and warm, curious and wary all at once. He'd never had such an attractive woman minister to him before. She sat on the edge of the bed, hair falling loose around her face. At such close proximity, he noticed how long her eyelashes were, How perfect her lips.
Steady, Booker.
Where does it hurt? He touched the goose egg to show her the place. She had wrapped the ice in a cloth and gently laid it on the throbbing spot. Ah, heavenly. Thank you. He took her hand. It seemed quite natural to do so after all they had been through. I just want to say that I believe you. Believe you are innocent and kind and lovely. She looked down, but he saw her suppressed smile and blushing cheeks. I am glad to hear it. She glanced up at him and added wryly, but then again, you have just suffered a blow to the head. Whoever it was must have knocked you senseless. He chuckled. Then I may think quite differently when I recover. He held her gaze. But I hope not.
Tension.